Montana Territory, 1876. The setting sun painted the rugged landscape in hues of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the frontier town of Silveridge. Dust devils danced between wooden buildings while the distant mountains stood as silent sentinels over a land not yet tamed by civilization. In this harsh corner of the American West, life followed simple rules. Trust yourself, trust your gun, and never trust your heart to anyone. Dawson McAllister believed in those rules more than most. At 25 years old, he'd already seen enough death and disappointment to last several lifetimes. The lean, broad-shouldered cowboy adjusted his worn Stetson, shielding his deep blue eyes from the glare as he guided his chestnut gelding down the main street. His clean-shaven face, bronzed by years under the open sky, remained impassive despite the curious glances from townspeople. "The frontier strips away everything but what matters," his father had told him before dying of fever 3 winters past. "Out here, a man stands alone." Dawson had taken those words as gospel truth. The vast Montana wilderness had claimed too many dreamers and fools who mistook companionship for survival. He'd built his small ranch through solitary grit, convinced that attachments were luxuries he couldn't afford. Love was for city folks and novels, not for men trying to carve a life from unforgiving land. Yet something gnawed at him in the quiet moments between work and sleep, a hollow space that whiskey couldn't fill and that widened with each passing season. He pushed such thoughts aside. What he wanted was simple: to expand his herd, to make his land prosper, to survive another year. Nothing more complicated than that. As Dawson tied his horse outside the general store, he noticed an unfamiliar wagon parked nearby. Nothing unusual about newcomers in these parts, though few lasted when winter came howling down from the mountains. He stepped onto the boardwalk, boots thudding against weathered planks. "Afternoon, McAllister," called Henry Jenkins, the storekeeper. "Your order came in on yesterday's stage." Dawson nodded, reaching for the list in his vest pocket. "Appreciate it. Need to add some rifle cartridges if you've got them." That's when he heard it, laughter, light and musical, cutting through the store's dusty atmosphere like sunlight through storm clouds. Despite himself, he turned toward the sound. She stood in the fabric section, holding bolts of calico to the light. 21, perhaps 22 years old, with honey-blonde hair cascading in waves beneath a modest bonnet. Her blue dress, though travel-worn, was well-made, hugging a slender waist before flaring into a modest bustle. When she turned, Dawson caught a glimpse of eyes the color of summer sage and a smile that seemed to brighten the entire store. "I believe this one will do nicely," she said to the older woman beside her. "Don't you think, Aunt Martha?" Something about her voice, cultured but not pretentious, with a hint of Eastern accent, made Dawson linger longer than he'd intended. He realized he was staring only when Jenkins cleared his throat. "That's Pearl Vanderley," the storekeeper offered quietly. "Arrived from Boston last week with her aunt. They've taken over the old Whitaker place outside town." Dawson frowned. "Whitakers? That land's been fallow for years. Nothing but trouble and heartache waiting there." Jenkins shrugged. "Seems they inherited it. The aunt's husband was Whitaker's cousin or some such." Before Dawson could respond, the young woman approached the counter, arms filled with purchases. He stepped aside, tipping his hat politely. "Thank you, sir," she said, those sage-green eyes meeting his briefly. "Ma'am." He managed a curt nod, unsettled by the strange flutter beneath his ribs. Pearl Vanderley placed her items on the counter. "Mr. Jenkins, might I inquire about hiring a local man who knows ranching? My aunt and I find ourselves somewhat overwhelmed with the condition of our property." Jenkins stroked his beard. "Most hands are contracted through fall roundup, Miss Vanderley," though his eyes slid meaningfully toward Dawson. She followed his gaze, studying Dawson with newfound interest. "Are you familiar with ranch work, Mr. McAllister?" "Dawson McAllister," he shifted uncomfortably. "I run cattle on the North Ridge." "How fortunate," her face brightened. "Perhaps you might consider—" "I work alone, Miss Vanderley." The words came out harsher than intended. "And I've got more than enough keeping my own place running." Something flickered in her eyes, disappointment perhaps, but no surprise. as if she'd heard such refusals before. Of course, I wouldn't dream of imposing. Good day, gentlemen. Dawson watched her gather her packages, feeling strangely regretful as she and her aunt departed. Jenkins gave him a reproachful look. You could have been more neighborly, McAllister. Neighborly gets you nowhere out here, Dawson replied, but the words rang hollow even to his own ears. Those women won't last a month, city folks never do. Yet as he loaded his supplies and rode out of town, Dawson found himself taking the road that passed the old Whitaker place. He told himself it was mere curiosity, nothing more. The property came into view, a small farmhouse, weathered but sound, a barn listing dangerously to one side, and fields long since given back to native grasses. He slowed his horse, watching from a distance as Pearl Vanderley struggled to repair a section of fence. Her determination was evident even from afar, though her technique left much to be desired. Dawson turned his horse away. Not his problem. The frontier taught hard lessons, and those women would learn them soon enough, or they'd return east with their dreams in tatters, like so many before them. But that night, as he sat alone on his cabin porch watching stars emerge over silent mountains, Dawson found himself thinking of sage-green eyes and a smile that seemed to defy the harshness of frontier life. He pushed the thoughts away. Attachment was weakness. Weakness got you killed out here. He'd learned that lesson well. The following week brought unseasonable storms. Dawson spent 3 days securing his herd and repairing weather damage, working until his muscles screamed and exhaustion claimed him each night. On the 4th day, as he was heading toward town for supplies, dark clouds gathered again on the horizon. Passing the Whitaker, now Vanderley, property, he noticed the barn roof partially collapsed, the front door banging open in the rising wind. He shouldn't stop, he had his own concerns. With a muttered curse, Dawson turned his horse toward the farmhouse. As he approached, he spotted Pearl wrestling with a sheet of canvas, attempting to cover the damaged roof before the storm hit. Miss Vanderley, he called, dismounting quickly. That's no job for a woman alone. She turned, hair whipping in the wind, her dress plastered against her by the first spattering of rain. Mr. McAllister. What brings you here? Pure madness, he muttered, securing his horse. Where's your aunt? In town seeking a carpenter. We didn't expect another storm so soon. Her hands were raw and blistered but still clutched the canvas determinedly. Get down from there before you break your neck. He reached for her, and after a moment's hesitation, she allowed him to help her from the precarious perch. The storm hit with sudden fury. They barely managed to secure the loose door and take shelter inside before rain lashed the windows with horizontal fury. The farmhouse interior surprised Dawson. Despite peeling wallpaper and worn floorboards, order had been imposed through sheer determination. A cheerful quilt brightened a faded settee, bookshelves held volumes that seemed out of place in a frontier home, and the smell of fresh-baked bread lingered in the air. I apologize for the state of things, Pearl said, wringing water from her skirts. We've had little time to properly settle. Dawson removed his dripping hat. No need to apologize, you've made remarkable progress considering. Her eyebrows rose at the unexpected compliment. Mr. McAllister. It's the least I can offer for your assistance, however brief it might be. While she busied herself at the stove, Dawson found himself studying her more closely. Away from town, she'd foregone the formal bonnet. Her honey-blonde hair was partially pinned up, with tendrils escaping to frame a face that combined Eastern refinement with a new determination he suspected hadn't been there before her arrival in Montana. What brought you to Silveridge, Miss Vanderley? The question escaped before he could stop himself. She turned, kettle in hand. Necessity, in truth. My father's investments failed shortly before his death last winter. When Aunt Martha inherited this property, it seemed Providence offering a new beginning. A sad smile touched her lips. Though I confess, the reality of frontier life has proven more challenging than the romantic novels suggest. Most people come west chasing stories, Dawson said. The true frontier has little use for romance. Is that what you believe? She handed him a steaming cup. That there's no place for beauty or connection in such a harsh land? The directness of her question caught him off guard. "I believe in practicality, Miss Vanderley. Survival first, everything else is luxury." "And yet," she said, sitting across from him, "the first settlers brought music and books alongside their tools. They planted flowers as well as crops." Her eyes held his. "Perhaps survival means preserving what makes life worth living, not merely extending its length." Something in her words disturbed the careful boundaries of Dawson's beliefs. Before he could formulate a response, a tremendous crash came from the barn. "The horses!" Pearl leapt to her feet. Together they dashed through the downpour to find half the barn roof now collapsed, with two frightened horses trapped inside. Working in wordless coordination, they freed the animals and salvaged what they could before the storm rendered further efforts impossible. By evening the rain had passed, leaving behind a sodden landscape bathed in strange golden light. Dawson knew he should leave, yet found himself helping Pearl assess the damage. "It's worse than I feared," she admitted, surveying the barn with dismay. "I don't know how we'll manage repairs before winter." Dawson studied the structure with a practiced eye. "Your foundation's sound, framework too, mostly. It's not as dire as it looks. For someone accustomed to such work, perhaps." She gazed up at him. "Mr. McAllister, I realize you prefer solitude, but might I propose a business arrangement? We need a knowledgeable man's guidance, if only temporarily. We can pay fair wages." His instinct was to refuse immediately. Instead, he heard himself asking, "What exactly are you proposing?" "1 month of your time," she said. "Help us make this place habitable for winter. Teach me what I need to know to maintain it afterward." She extended her hand, a startlingly forward gesture for a lady. "Will you be my partner in this, Cowboy?" The question hung between them, weighted with more meaning than its simple words suggested. Looking into those determined sage-green eyes, Dawson felt something shift inside him, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself since his father's death. 1 month, he found himself saying, taking her hand briefly, "starting tomorrow." The smile that illuminated her face stirred something long dormant in his chest. As he rode home beneath clearing skies, Dawson told himself it was merely neighborly duty, nothing more. But deep down, he recognized the lie for what it was. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Dawson arrived at the Vanderley property with his wagon loaded with tools and lumber from his own stores. Pearl greeted him on the porch, hair neatly pinned beneath a practical bonnet, wearing a simple work dress rather than the finer attire she'd worn in town. "You came," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. "I gave my word." He began unloading the wagon. "Where's your aunt?" "Still in town. The stage was delayed by the storm." Pearl descended the steps to help him. "What shall we tackle first?" "The barn roof before another storm finishes what the last one started." He paused, assessing her determined expression. "This isn't ladies' work, Miss Vanderley." A spark of defiance lit her eyes. "I may lack experience, Mr. McAllister, but not capability. I didn't come west to sit idly while others build my future." Despite his misgivings, Dawson found Pearl a quicker study than anticipated. She listened attentively to instructions, asked intelligent questions, and threw herself into physical labor with surprising endurance. By midday, they had cleared the debris and begun framing repairs to the roof. As they paused for a simple lunch Pearl had prepared, she asked about his own ranch. "Nothing grand," he admitted. 60 head of cattle, a decent spring cabin that doesn't leak much. Built it all myself over 5 years. No family to help you." Dawson stared into the distance. "Father died 3 winters back. Mother passed when I was young. No siblings." "I'm sorry," her voice held genuine empathy. "Loneliness is its own kind of hardship." "Not lonely," he corrected. "Solitary, there's a difference." Pearl studied him with those perceptive eyes. "Is there? Both leave you facing the silence alone at day's end." Before he could respond, the sound of an approaching wagon interrupted them. Martha Vanderley, a practical-looking woman in her 50s, regarded Dawson with polite surprise as Pearl explained their arrangement. "Most generous of you, Mr. McAllister," she said, though her expression held reservation. I trust you'll find us fair employers." "Dawson isn't our employee, Aunt Martha," Pearl corrected gently. "He's our partner in this endeavor." The word partner lingered in Dawson's mind as he rode home that evening. It had been years since he'd worked alongside another person with shared purpose. The sensation was not unpleasant. Days fell into a productive rhythm. Mornings until mid-afternoon were spent repairing the Vanderley property. Dawson would then return to his own ranch to tend his cattle and handle necessary work there, often laboring until well after dark. The arrangement left little time for rest, but he found himself rising each morning with unexpected energy. Pearl proved herself remarkably adaptable. Her hands, once soft from Eastern comforts, toughened with blisters and calluses she bore without complaint. She absorbed every lesson in frontier survival Dawson offered, from mending fences to predicting weather from cloud patterns. "You're a natural horsewoman," he commented one morning, watching her gentle and nervous mare. "Most Easterners approach horses like fine furniture, afraid to use them properly." She laughed, the sound warming him more than the autumn sun overhead. "My father believed ladies should ride as well as they played piano. Though I confess I always preferred the stables to the parlor." Her expression grew distant. "He would be shocked to see me now, covered in dirt and hammering nails." "Would he disapprove?" "No," she said after consideration. Surprised perhaps but not disappointed, father valued adaptation above all. "Life rewards the flexible reed, not the rigid oak," he always said. "Wise man." "He was." Sadness briefly shadowed her face, though his financial judgment proved less sound than his philosophical insights. As October progressed, the Vanderley place transformed. The barn stood sturdy once more, the house weatherproofed against coming winter. Even the fallow fields were partially cleared in preparation for spring planting. Martha Vanderley, initially skeptical of their arrangement, gradually warmed to Dawson's presence, especially after he repaired the stove that had smoked incessantly since their arrival. In town, Dawson noticed changed attitudes toward him as well. Jenkins and other merchants engaged him in conversation rather than the terse exchanges of before. He discovered Pearl had spoken well of him to anyone who would listen. Folks were placing wagers on how long those women would last, Sheriff Coleman mentioned during one of Dawson's supply runs. "Now they're talking about the Vanderley place becoming a proper ranch, thanks to you." "Miss Vanderley's determination deserves the credit," Dawson corrected. "I'm merely providing guidance." The sheriff's knowing smile suggested he heard more than Dawson intended to reveal. By the third week of their arrangement, something had fundamentally shifted between Dawson and Pearl. Comfortable silences replaced awkward pauses. They developed wordless communication, a glance or nod conveying as much as sentences. During breaks, Pearl would sometimes read aloud from one of her books while Dawson whittled or mended tack, the simple domesticity of these moments stirring long-forgotten yearnings. One evening, as sunset painted the repaired barn in golden hues, Pearl joined Dawson as he prepared to leave. "Will you stay for supper?" she asked. "Aunt Martha has prepared a roast to celebrate the completion of the west pasture fence." He hesitated, aware of crossing some invisible boundary. Their partnership had remained firmly in daylight hours, safe, purposeful, contained. "I'd be honored," he heard himself say. That meal marked another turning point. Martha's excellent cooking and surprisingly lively conversation kept them at the table long after the food was gone. For the first time in years, Dawson found himself sharing stories of his early days in Montana, his father's dreams for their ranch, even admitting his own loneliness after his father's passing. "You've accomplished much on your own," Martha observed, "but imagine what might be possible with shared labor and shared joy." The pointed comment brought color to Pearl's cheeks, though Dawson pretended not to notice the implication. As the month neared its end, a sense of impending loss settled over Dawson. The Vanderleys' property now stood ready for winter, barn secure, woodpile stacked high, house properly insulated. Their business arrangement had fulfilled its purpose. Yet he found himself inventing new projects, suggesting improvements that could wait until spring, anything to extend his time with Pearl. Her presence had become as necessary as air, her perspective changing how he viewed his own solitary existence. On the morning of their final day together, Dawson arrived earlier than usual. Pearl met him at the fence line, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "I thought we might ride the property boundaries today," she suggested, "so I can truly understand our land." They rode side by side through golden October light, Pearl attentive as Dawson pointed out natural landmarks and potential improvements for spring. Her confidence on horseback had grown considerably, matching her increasing knowledge of ranching operations. At midday, they stopped atop a ridge overlooking both properties, the Vanderley farm below them, and in the distance, the smoke from Dawson's cabin chimney barely visible. "Your home looks so distant from here," Pearl observed. "Do you ever wonder what purpose such isolation serves?" The question stirred his defenses. "Independence isn't isolation, Miss Vanderley." "Isn't it?" She turned to face him fully. "These past weeks have taught me much about ranching, Mr. McAllister, but they've taught me more about you." "I'm not sure I take your meaning." "You built walls not from strength but from fear." Her words cut with gentle precision. "You believed solitude would protect you from loss, when in truth it merely guaranteed it." Dawson stared at the distant mountains, unable to meet her gaze. "The frontier breaks what cannot bend, Pearl. I've seen too many good people crushed by its demands." "Or perhaps," she said softly, "it reveals what truly matters: connection, partnership, the courage to build something larger than oneself." She touched his arm lightly. "Our arrangement ends today. Will you simply ride away and return to your solitude as if these weeks meant nothing?" Before he could answer, gunshots echoed from the direction of the farmhouse. "Aunt Martha," Pearl's face went pale. They raced down the ridge, pushing their horses to dangerous speeds over uneven ground. As they approached the farmhouse, Dawson spotted 3 mounted men in the yard, one holding Martha Vanderley by the arm while another ransacked the house. "Stay back," he ordered Pearl, drawing his revolver. "I will not," she replied, pulling a small derringer from her saddlebag. "That is my home and my family." They approached carefully, using the newly repaired barn for cover. Dawson recognized the intruders, the Tanner brothers, local troublemakers who'd graduated from petty theft to more violent crimes over recent months. "Just hand over whatever cash you got, lady, and we'll ride out peaceful-like," the oldest Tanner was saying to Martha. "I believe you gentlemen are trespassing," Dawson called, stepping into view with his revolver trained on the speaker. The 3 brothers turned, surprise giving way to ugly smiles. "Well, if it ain't the high-end mighty McAllister," said Jeb Tanner, the eldest. "Didn't figure you for taking up with these Eastern women. Times must be hard." "Release Mrs. Vanderley and ride out now," Dawson replied evenly. "The sheriff knows where to find you if anything's missing." The youngest Tanner laughed. "Sheriff's handling trouble over at Granite Pass, won't be back for days." His eyes shifted to Pearl, who had emerged beside Dawson. "Besides, looks like there's plenty worth taking here." The leering implication made Dawson's blood boil, but Pearl spoke before he could respond. "Our funds are in the bank in town, gentlemen," she said with remarkable composure. "There's nothing of value here except livestock and tools too heavy for you to carry." "We'll be the judge of that," Jeb snapped. "Levi, check the barn. I bet they've got valuables hidden." As the middle brother moved toward the barn, Dawson fired a warning shot into the ground near his feet. "Next one won't miss." What followed was a brief, chaotic exchange of gunfire. Dawson managed to wound Jeb in the shoulder, while Pearl's derringer shot went wide, but startled the youngest Tanner enough that Martha broke free and ran toward the house. The brothers retreated, firing wildly as they mounted up. "This ain't over, McAllister," Jeb shouted as they galloped away. "Nobody draws on a Tanner without consequences." In the sudden silence afterward, Dawson turned to find Pearl shaking but unbowed. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, checking her for injuries. "No," she managed, though her voice trembled. "Aunt Martha." The older woman emerged from the house, pale but unharmed. "They wanted the deed to the property," she said. "Claimed they had a prior arrangement with Whitaker." Dawson frowned. That's nonsense. Whitaker was running from debts when he abandoned this place. He glanced toward the horizon where dust still rose from the tanner's retreat. But they'll be back, likely with reinforcements. Then we shall be prepared, Pearl stated with surprising firmness. This is our home and we will defend it. That night, despite Martha's protests that he should return to his own ranch, Dawson insisted on staying to guard the property. After Martha retired, he and Pearl sat on the porch, rifles across their laps, watching the moonlit landscape. I never fired a gun at a person before today, Pearl confessed quietly. I always considered them necessary tools out here, but the reality is, she trailed off. Different, Dawson finished. Taking aim at a man isn't like hunting game. Yet you didn't hesitate to defend us. Some choices require no deliberation. Pearl studied him in the silver moonlight. Like the choice to remain alone, is that also beyond question? The directness of her gaze demanded equal honesty. It seemed the safest path once, now I'm less certain. Because of today. Because of you, the admission felt like stepping off a precipice. You've shown me there might be something worth the risk of loss. Her hand found his in the darkness, warm and certain. What if there is no loss? What if there is only gain? Before he could answer, a distant glow caught his attention, firelight where no fire should be. My ranch, he realized with sudden dread. They've set fire to my ranch. The flames were visible from the ridge, Dawson's cabin and barn engulfed in vengeful fire. They arrived too late to save anything but the terrified cattle that had broken free of their enclosure. Dawn revealed the full extent of destruction. Everything Dawson had built over 5 years lay in charred ruins. The cabin walls stood like blackened sentinels over ashes that had been his life's work. His face remained impassive as he surveyed the damage, but Pearl saw the devastation in his eyes. You can rebuild, she said softly, standing beside him amidst the ruins. 5 years of work, gone in one night. His voice was hollow. Because I helped you. Dawson. This is why connections are dangerous out here. Bitterness edged his words. This is the price of caring about anything beyond survival. No, Pearl gripped his arm, forcing him to look at her. This is the price of evil men's actions, not of human connection. The Tanners would have eventually targeted you anyway. A man alone is an easy victim. As am I now, he gestured to the destruction. Everything gone. Not everything, her eyes held his. You have allies now, people who care what happens to you. Caring changes nothing. It doesn't rebuild barns or replace livelihoods. Doesn't it? A new determination hardened her voice. The raising of this cabin was your first lesson to me about frontier life. Many hands make impossible tasks manageable. Now it's time for you to learn the same. By midday, Sheriff Coleman had arrived with a posse, tracking the Tanners who had fled toward the territorial line. More surprising to Dawson was the arrival of neighbors he barely knew, Jenkins from the store, Coleman's deputy, the blacksmith, and several small ranchers, all bringing tools, lumber, and willing hands. Miss Vanderley rode into town at first light, Jenkins explained, made quite the speech about community and obligation. Dawson looked across the busy scene to where Pearl directed the unloading of supplies, her honey-blonde hair glinting in the autumn sun. She's something, that one, the sheriff commented, following Dawson's gaze. Frontier could use more women with her spirit. She doesn't belong out here, Dawson said, though the words felt false even as he spoke them. Coleman chuckled. Seems to me she belongs exactly where she chooses to be. Question is, are you man enough to recognize what's being offered? For 3 days, the community Dawson had held at arm's length labored to rebuild his cabin. Pearl and Martha provided meals for the workers, Pearl herself never hesitating to lift lumber or hold supports as needed. At night, the Vanderleys insisted Dawson stay in their spare room rather than sleeping rough at his ruined property. On the 4th evening, as the new cabin's framework stood outlined against the sunset, Dawson found Pearl alone on the porch after Martha had retired. "Why did you do it?" he asked, the question that had burned in him since the neighbors arrived. She looked up from her mending. "Do what?" Rally the town, convince them to help a man most barely knew. Because you needed it, she answered simply. And because community isn't something that exists, it's something we create through action. She set aside her work, the same way partnership isn't granted but built, decision by decision. I'm not sure I deserve either. Pearl rose, standing before him in the fading light. Worthiness isn't the question, Dawson, courage is. Her eyes searched his. 5 days remain in our arrangement. What happens when they end? Will you retreat to your rebuilt solitude, or will you consider a more permanent partnership? The word hung between them, laden with meaning beyond business or property. I have nothing to offer now, he said roughly. My herd scattered, my ranch destroyed. If material wealth were my concern, I would have accepted any of the 3 marriage proposals I received in Boston. She stepped closer. I seek a partner of character, of shared purpose, a man who sees me as his equal. Is that how you see me, as a potential husband? The word felt foreign on his tongue. I see you as a man afraid to claim happiness because he fears its loss. Her hand touched his cheek gently. The frontier demands courage in all things, Dawson, not just facing outlaws or breaking horses. Before he could respond, hoofbeats approached rapidly. They turned to see the sheriff's deputy riding hard toward the house. Tanner's crossed into Wyoming, he called, reining in his lathered horse. Coleman's got a federal marshal joining the pursuit, but he wanted you to know they won't trouble you for now. Relief should have followed this news, but Dawson felt only the weight of decisions postponed. As the deputy rode away, Pearl turned to him once more. Our time grows short, she said softly. Soon you must choose, retreat to familiar isolation or risk everything for something greater. That night sleep eluded Dawson. Dawn found him sitting on the Vanderley porch, watching the eastern sky lighten. Martha emerged first, nodding at his presence as if expecting it. You've made quite an impression on my niece, Mr. McAllister, she said, settling beside him with her morning coffee. I've never seen her so invested in another person's welfare. She deserves better than a man who's lost everything. Martha's laugh surprised him. Pearl doesn't want possessions, young man. After watching her father's fortune disappear and seeing the hollow marriages of her wealthy friends, she values something far rarer, authentic connection. And if I cannot provide even that? If I don't know how? The older woman studied him thoughtfully. The fact you're asking suggests you already do. She rose as Pearl appeared in the doorway. Some conversations belong to the young. I'll see to breakfast. As Martha disappeared inside, Pearl joined Dawson on the porch steps. Morning light gilded her features, emphasizing the quiet determination that had gradually rewritten his understanding of strength. I've been thinking, he began awkwardly. A dangerous pastime, she teased gently. Our arrangement ends in 4 days. Yes. What if, he paused, gathering courage, what if we considered a different arrangement? A more permanent one. Hope flashed across her face before caution tempered it. What exactly are you proposing, Dawson McAllister? A partnership between your land and what remains of mine. Between your knowledge of books and beautiful things and my understanding of cattle and seasons. He took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. Between a man who thought survival was enough and a woman who showed him it never was. Pearl's sage-green eyes searched his face. Are you asking me to marry you, Cowboy? I'm asking if you'll have me, broken fences, scattered herd and all. His voice roughened with emotion. I'm asking if you'll build something with me that neither of us could create alone. Will you be my partner, Cowboy? She asked, echoing her words from that rain-soaked day that had changed everything. In all things, he promised, for all days. Her kiss was his answer, tender yet certain, breaking the last barriers around his heart. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in Silveridge's small church. The same neighbors who had helped rebuild Dawson's cabin filled the pews, witnessing the union of 2 people who had individually sought new beginnings and together found a shared future. Sheriff Coleman captured the sentiment in his toast at the modest reception. The frontier breaks many, but it also reveals what's truly valuable. Some find gold in these mountains. Others, like Dawson and Pearl, discover something far rarer, a love strong enough to tame the wilderness, not just around them but within them. By spring, the newly christened McAllister Vanderley Ranch had become a symbol of possibility to the community. The merged properties allowed for expanded cattle operations, while Pearl's eastern connections opened markets for premium beef. Martha's organizational skills transformed the business side of ranching, handling accounts with precision that increased their profits considerably. More significant were the smaller changes. Dawson's cabin, rebuilt and expanded, now featured Pearl's books alongside practical tools. Wildflowers bloomed around the porch where once only weeds had grown. And most evenings found them together on that porch, watching sunset paint the mountains while discussing cattle prices and Shakespeare with equal animation. When autumn returned, marking 1 year since their first meeting, Dawson presented Pearl with a gift, a small wooden cradle, lovingly carved during evening hours. "For the future," he explained as tears filled her eyes. "For the family we'll build just as we built everything else together." Pearl placed his hand over her abdomen, her smile confirming what he had begun to suspect. "The future arrives sooner than you think, partner." As winter settled over Montana territory, the McAllister Vanderley Ranch stood as testament to a truth Dawson had once denied. That in the harshest landscapes, it is not isolation that ensures survival, but the courage to build connections strong enough to weather any storm. His heart, once carefully bounded by caution and fear, now expanded with each passing season, embracing first a partner, then a community, and soon, a child who would inherit not just land and cattle, but the legacy of two people brave enough to choose love on the untamed frontier.